Let's turn our attention to a Guildford man who has admitted to BBC Surrey that he runs what he describes as a cannabis cafe from his council-owned flat. Jonathan Falkus says that his doors are open to anyone who wants a place to smoke the drug, have a drink and a bite to eat. And he says he'll carry on with his business despite complaints from neighbours, visits by the police and ongoing investigation by the Borough Council. Jonathan, who's in his 50s, says he smoked cannabis since about the age of 16, now wants to make a living from what he has described as his hobby. Our reporter Mike Buxton spoke to him.
Yeah, the police have come 3 times. They spoke to us quite seriously, but, politely and respectfully. We haven't had any problems really with the police. They've only busted us for about a joint's worth of my gear, which will lead to a £90 fine.
And what about Guildford Borough Council? Because I understand this is a council flat that you are running this cafe in.
It's a very nice council flat. I'm very grateful to the council for providing it for me. They've threatened to evict me and asked us to do 3 things. One is take away a sofa that was on the front garden, which we've done. Keep the noise down, which we're making every effort to do. Get rid of the lodgers, which I have largely done. And stop running a cannabis cafe and a hotel there, which I'm adamantly refusing to stop doing.
So you are saying that you will continue?
Oh, absolutely.
What about the neighbours? Because I understand there has been complaints from at least one neighbour with regards to the comings and goings and the smell of the drug.
Yeah, we have tried to get the council to fit a hydraulic arm on the door, which bangs shut. If you just let go of it, we're looking for crowdfunding to get an arm for that door. It'd be about £150 fitted. That would stop the door banging and upsetting our upstairs neighbours.
Guildford Borough Council says that using a flat in the way being suggested would be a potential breach of a tenancy agreement. It says it's investigating the matter and cannot comment any further at this stage. And we did invite Surrey Police to contribute this morning, but they were unable to work within our time frame.
So let's speak to Peter Reynolds, who's leader of Clear. That's a campaign group calling for a reform of cannabis law. Good morning.
Good morning.
Peter, can I get your reaction to this story, first of all? This man is running a cannabis cafe from a council-owned flat.
Okay, well, I think the first thing to say is that my real concern is for Mr. Falkus and for his neighbours. This sort of anarchic behaviour is what happens when you have a completely irrational and ridiculous policy on cannabis that we have in this country. But what concerns me most of all is, first of all, if Mr. Falkus is disturbing his neighbours, that's not on. But secondly, Mr. Falkus is going to get himself arrested and quite possibly could lose his home. And these are the real dangers of cannabis. The most important, the most dangerous thing about cannabis is using it with tobacco. The second most dangerous thing about cannabis is getting arrested for it. And when we have a policy which tries to sweep under the carpet the fact that 3 million people use cannabis regularly, that we spend £6 billion a year on cannabis, that we use 3.5 tons of cannabis every single day, then this is the sort of anarchy that you're going to get.
This wouldn't be happening, though, would it, if the police and the council sort of went in and stopped it straight away?
Well, it wouldn't be, but some people undoubtedly will be calling for a hard line on this. And it does bring the whole law of our land into disrepute. But the reason the police aren't doing it is because the police know and understand tacitly that cannabis is not a real problem. The main problem about cannabis is when the police start enforcing the law. Because when the police enforce the law, it drives people underground. People, take over rented property, set up cannabis farms. You get dealers on the streets selling to children. What we need is a regulated market where legitimate outlets like this are licensed, are able to sell cannabis, where there's some sort of quality control over it, where we're sure they're not selling it to children, where they're not disturbing their neighbours because they're regulated in the same way as a bar
Peter, you
might
say
be.
that cannabis is not the problem. However, there is a body of evidence that suggests that prolonged use can cause harm. At the end of the day, it is a drug, it is addictive.
Well, it's addictive to about exactly the same extent as coffee. And that is what the scientific evidence shows. And I heard what your addiction...
Is it really the same as coffee?
Yes, really. There are 2 very eminent scientists, Professor Henningfield and Professor Benowitz, who produced scales of addictiveness relating to cannabis, show that in fact it's slightly less addictive than coffee. And, if you look at the actual, there's a lot of hype and hysteria around cannabis, but if you look at the actual facts of the number of people who are admitted to hospital or undergo medical treatments that isn't forced on them by the courts, then it's tiny.
Peter, do you think with your campaign to call for reform of the cannabis law, I mean, this is a debate that's been raging for years and years and years and years. Do you ever think you'll reach a point where cannabis becomes legal in Britain?
Yes, very, very definitely. I mean, we're already seeing you've got to realise that Britain is almost isolated in the world now in its attitude to cannabis. We are backwards compared to every other country in Europe, compared to the United States, compared to Israel. All these countries are recognising not only the benefits of cannabis in medicinal terms, but also the fact that when you ban cannabis and drive it underground, that's what causes the harm. That's what causes people to do rather foolish things like Mr. Folkus is doing, that disturb neighbours. That's what enables children to get hold of it. That's what means that people are smoking contaminated products, which they're buying off the streets from nasty people. And the fact of the matter is, if you support prohibition, if you support the laws against cannabis, then you're actually on the side of the criminal gangs.
Peter, we'll leave it there. Peter Reynolds, leader of Clear, that's a campaign group calling for a reform of cannabis law.